There's something deeply human about feeling stuck, about those moments when it seems like there's no way forward, when your thoughts spiral and nothing seems to quiet the noise in your mind. But what if I told you that feeling hopeless and overthinking are not signs of failure or weakness? They are signals. They are your internal systems working overtime to warn you, to protect you. The problem is, most of us were never taught how to interpret those signals. Let's start with hopelessness. Hopelessness thrives in isolation. When people feel like they have no options, no support, and no direction, the mind begins to believe the lie that things will never change. But things always change. Change is not something you choose. It's something that happens whether you're ready or not. The power you do have is how you respond to it. The opposite of hopelessness is not motivation, it's perspective. When we zoom out, when we allow ourselves to see our problems from a distance, something interesting happens. We realize that what feels permanent right now has actually never lasted forever. Think about it, every hard thing you've ever faced, you've survived. Every anxious moment, every mistake, every heartache, you're still here. That means something. Now, let's talk about overthinking. Overthinking is not the result of too many problems, it's the result of too few decisions. Our minds crave closure, structure, clarity. And when we don't give it that, our thoughts run in circles. We replay the same scenarios, predict every possible outcome, and analyze things that haven't even happened. Why? Because uncertainty is uncomfortable. But here's a principle that changes everything. You don't need to know the entire path. You just need to take the next right step. We overthink because we're trying to control too much at once. Life isn't a chess game. It's more like a compass. You don't need a map of the whole world. You just need a sense of direction. When we focus on what we can control, our attitude, our next action, our values, overthinking loses its grip. Now, some will say, but what if I make the wrong choice? And to that, I say there is no such thing as a perfect choice. There is only movement and stillness. And staying stuck doing nothing is a decision too, one that costs more than we think. The goal is not to stop thinking. The goal is to think usefully, to become aware of the difference between reflection and rumination. Reflection leads to insight. Rumination leads to paralysis. One moves you forward. The other keeps you spinning. So how do you shift from hopelessness and overthinking to clarity and momentum? Start small. Reclaim your mornings. Create a rhythm to your days. Write down your thoughts instead of letting them bounce around in your head. And above all, talk to someone. Not just when you're struggling, but consistently. Connection doesn't just heal, it prevents. Remember, your mind is not the enemy, but it needs a leader. And that leader is you. No matter how heavy today feels, tomorrow has not yet been written. Never let hopelessness convince you that the story is over. Never let overthinking trick you into believing you're stuck. You are always just one small, brave step away from changing everything. 5 keynotes of the speech. Hopelessness is a signal, not a verdict. Gain perspective rather than waiting for motivation. Overthinking stems from indecision and a lack of clarity, not complexity. Focus on the next right step. Movement is more powerful than perfection. Action breaks mental loops and builds confidence. Train your mind to distinguish reflection, useful, from ruminations, paralyzing. Structure, connection, and consistent habits reduce both hopelessness and overthinking over time. Hopelessness is a signal, not a verdict. Gain perspective rather than waiting for motivation. When people feel hopeless, they often describe it as a heavy, sinking feeling, like standing in quicksand while the rest of the world keeps moving forward. The mistake we often make is assuming that this feeling is final, that it means something permanent about who we are or where we're going. But that simply isn't true. Hopelessness is not a verdict. It's not a label stamped on your life. It's a message, a signal from your mind and body that something needs your attention. And like all signals, it's there to inform, not to define. Think of a fire alarm. When it goes off, it doesn't mean the house is destroyed. It means something's wrong and you need to investigate. Hopelessness works the same way. It doesn't mean your life is broken. It means something is misaligned. Maybe you're overwhelmed. Maybe you're exhausted. Maybe you've lost connection with what matters. But it's never the end of the story. That feeling is your system's way of asking for perspective, for direction, for renewal. The challenge is that most people wait for motivation to appear before they act. We've all said it. Once I feel better, I'll get back on track. Once I'm inspired, I'll move forward. But that's not how the mind works. Motivation doesn't always come first. In fact, motivation is often a result of action, not the cause of it. Waiting to feel better before doing something is like waiting to get warm before you build a fire. It simply doesn't work that way. Perspective, however, is something you can create immediately. It's not a mood, it's a mindset. You gain perspective when you step back and look at your situation from a different angle. It's when you stop focusing on how far you have to go and start noticing how far you've already come. When you zoom out, you see more. You begin to realize that most of the things you're overwhelmed by today are things you once prayed or hoped for. That the storm you're in now might just be clearing the path for something better. There's a reason airplane windows are so small. If you look through a full-size window at 35,000 feet, the view would be overwhelming. But a small frame helps you focus. When you're feeling hopeless, your mental window becomes very narrow. You begin to see only what's going wrong, what's missing, and what hurts. And the longer you stay in that frame, the more convinced you become that there's nothing else outside it. That's where perspective matters. Because when you choose to widen that frame, when you look at your life not just in days, but in months and years, you begin to see patterns, progress, and potential. Perspective also reminds you that you're not alone. Hopelessness often convinces us that we are the only ones struggling, that everyone else has it together. But every person you admire, every success story you've heard, includes moments of doubt, fear, and failure. The difference isn't that they never felt hopeless, it's that they didn't let hopelessness have the final word. One of the most powerful ways to shift perspective is through gratitude. Not the shallow kind, but the deliberate act of acknowledging what is still good. Gratitude is like lighting a candle in a dark room. It doesn't eliminate all the darkness, but it reminds you that light still exists. And that reminder changes how you navigate everything else. You can also gain perspective by changing your environment. Go for a walk, talk to someone outside your usual circle, read something new, write down what you're thinking. These simple shifts pull your mind out of the loop of despair and give it new material to work with. Your brain is like a machine. It produces based on what you feed it. If you feed it only frustration and doubt, that's what it will generate. But if you introduce possibility, input, and curiosity, you begin to change the entire direction of your thinking. Another thing to understand is that hopelessness often grows in silence. When you keep everything bottled up, your mind starts filling in the blanks with fear. But when you speak, when you express what you're going through, whether in a journal or in conversation, it interrupts that cycle. You don't have to fix everything at once. You just have to let light in. The truth is, hopelessness isn't permanent. It feels permanent because it distorts your view of time and possibility. But every low moment you've ever had is past. Every dark cloud eventually moved. You may not be able to control what you feel, but you can control what you do with that feeling. And when you treat hopelessness as a signal, not a sentence, you take the first step back toward hope. Perspective is always available. You just have to look for it. Overthinking stems from indecision and a lack of clarity, not complexity. Focus on the next right step. Overthinking is often misunderstood. Many people believe it's a sign of intelligence or deep thought, but in truth, overthinking is not about depth. It's about repetition. It's the mind going circles, playing out the same scenarios over and over again, trying to find certainty where none exists. At its root, overthinking doesn't happen because a situation is too complicated. It happens because we haven't made a decision and we lack clarity on what matters most. The brain doesn't like unfinished business. When we're unsure of what to do, the mind fills the space with what ifs, replays, and imagined consequences. The longer we avoid choosing, the louder the noise becomes. The modern world fuels overthinking. We have endless options, constant access to information, and an expectation that we must always make the best possible choice. That pressure creates paralysis. When everything is a possibility, nothing feels certain. The fear of making the wrong choice becomes greater than the desire to make any choice at all. We end up waiting for the perfect plan or the perfect moment, which rarely comes. And so we stall. Clarity is not about knowing everything. It's about knowing what matters right now. It's about simplifying the chaos and asking, what is the next right step? That question changes everything. Because the next right step is always small. It's manageable. It doesn't require seeing the entire staircase, just taking the next visible step. And more often than not, clarity comes from action, not from thought. You can't think your way to a better life. You have to live your way there. When you take action, even a small one, you send a signal to your brain that you're moving, that you're not stuck. The feedback you get from action is real. You try something, you learn something, you adjust. That's how progress works. Overthinking, by contrast, is sterile. It doesn't give you data. It only gives you doubt. The mind builds stories based on fear, not fact. And when those stories play on repeat, they begin to feel like truth. One of the key reasons overthinking takes hold is because we feel the need to make decisions that will guarantee a perfect outcome. We ask ourselves, what's the best decision? Instead of, what's the next useful one? But perfection is a trap. There are very few choices in life that are truly irreversible. Most decisions can be adjusted, refined, or redirected once you're in motion. But when you're standing still, everything feels monumental. That's why momentum is more important than mastery. It's helpful to remember that decisions are not commitments to outcomes. They're commitments to a direction. You're not saying, this will work exactly as I hope. You're saying, this is worth trying based on what I know now. That mental shift reduces the pressure and makes decision making more fluid. It also helps you let go of the fear of regret because you're not claiming certainty, you're choosing progress. Sometimes overthinking is disguised as preparation. We tell ourselves we're just trying to be thorough, that we're just gathering all the facts. But at a certain point, preparation turns into procrastination. There's a difference between researching and delaying. The hard truth is most of the insight you're looking for won't come before the decision. It will come after it. You learn what works by doing, not by dwelling. Overthinking also feeds off the fear of judgment. We hesitate because we imagine what others might think. We play out their reactions in our heads before anything has even happened. But the people who matter most aren't the ones who expect perfection. They're the ones who respect growth. And growth only comes through experience. The next right step isn't always obvious, but it usually reveals itself when you ask the right questions. Questions like, what is one small action I can take today? What's within my control right now? What outcome am I willing to risk to move forward? These questions reduce the size of the problem and reframe your thinking from theoretical to practical. They shift you from passivity to participation. To overcome overthinking, you must interrupt the cycle. That interruption can be as simple as changing your environment, talking out loud, writing things down, or physically moving your body. These acts remind your brain that you are not trapped in your thoughts. You are separate from them. And when you realize that, you begin to see that thoughts are just suggestions, not commands. The mind is powerful, but it's also prone to distortion. When you rely on thought alone, you often magnify fears and minimize strengths. But when you act, you anchor your life in the real world. You replace imagined outcomes with lived experience. And that is how clarity begins to grow, not from perfect thinking, but from imperfect doing. The next right step is rarely dramatic, but it is always meaningful. And taking it is the only way to quiet the noise and start building a direction that feels true. Movement is more powerful than perfection. Action breaks mental loops and builds confidence. We spend so much of our lives waiting for the perfect moment, waiting until we feel completely ready, waiting for clarity, for certainty, for a sign. We are taught, often indirectly, that if something isn't flawless, it isn't worth doing. That idea leads to hesitation. It convinces us that progress must look polished. But real progress is messy. Real change is born from motion, not mastery. And if you look closely, you'll realize that what keeps most people stuck isn't a lack of talent or opportunity. It's the fear of starting imperfectly. Perfectionism is a clever disguise. On the surface, it looks like high standards or a strong work ethic. But underneath, it's usually fear. Fear of failure, fear of embarrassment, fear of not being enough. So instead of trying, we wait. We tweak, revise, delay, and dream, telling ourselves that we're just getting things right. But we're not getting things right. We're avoiding the discomfort of being seen in our early stages. And in doing so, we trade the possibility of success for the illusion of control. Movement, even small movement, changes the internal chemistry of the mind. It gives your brain something to work with, something real, something measurable. Action generates feedback. When you act, you either succeed or you learn. Both outcomes are useful. But when you stay stuck in your head, all you generate is more thought. And thought without movement becomes circular. You revisit the same ideas, the same fears, the same doubts, hoping for clarity that never arrives. One of the biggest myths we believe is that confidence comes before action, that we need to feel bold or certain before taking a step forward. But confidence is not a prerequisite, it's a result. The people who appear confident didn't start that way. They built it piece, by showing up, by trying, by failing, and by learning. Every time you act in the face of uncertainty, you train your mind to trust itself. You teach your body that it can survive discomfort. And over time, that becomes a habit. It becomes your default. There is a simple principle that can change how you approach almost anything. Done is better than perfect. This doesn't mean you should stop caring about quality or growth. It means that output matters more than intention. It means that you give yourself permission to be in process. And when you allow yourself to be in process, you actually accelerate your progress because movement creates data. Movement reveals blind spots, opens doors, attracts people, and invites collaboration. But none of that can happen in your imagination. People often say, I'm stuck. And what they usually mean is, I'm afraid to move. Because being stuck feels safer than moving and making a mistake. But there's a cost to inaction. It's invisible at first, but over time it grows. Self-doubt increases, energy, opportunities pass by, and worst of all, we start to believe that maybe we weren't meant to do the thing at all. But that's not truth. It's erosion. Erosion of belief caused by stagnation. The mind is most powerful when it's paired with momentum. Even the most brilliant ideas fade without execution. Think of it like water in a river. When it flows, it nourishes and carves new paths. When it stops, it becomes stagnant. The same applies to your thoughts and goals. Movement gives them oxygen. It turns potential into practice. And once you get moving, you'll often find that the resistance you felt wasn't about the task, was about the transition from stillness to motion. There is also an emotional benefit to movement. When we do something, even if it's small, we feel more in control. We reclaim a sense of agency. This emotional shift can be profound. It turns overwhelm into direction. It turns fear into focus. And it reminds us that while we can't control outcomes, we can always control effort. We often overestimate what we need to do in one big leap and underestimate what we can accomplish through consistent small steps. But the truth is momentum compounds. One step leads to the next. One email, one workout, one conversation, one idea acted on, it all adds up. And eventually, what once felt impossible becomes inevitable. The pursuit of perfection will always leave you exhausted, anxious, and unfulfilled. But the pursuit of progress through steady movement builds resilience and clarity. The choice is not between failure and perfection. The real choice is between movement and fear. Only one of those will move you forward. And even if the step you take today isn't flawless, it's still a step closer than you were yesterday. Train your mind to distinguish reflection useful from rumination paralyzing. The mind is always active, always thinking, always processing. But not all thinking is the same. There's a kind of thinking that helps you grow, and there's a kind that keeps you stuck. The difference is subtle but powerful. Reflection is intentional. It's focused on learning, understanding, and improving. Rumination, on the other hand, is compulsive. It replays past mistakes, regrets, and uncertainties on a loop. And the danger is that many people confuse the two. They think that because they're thinking deeply, they're solving something. But if your thinking doesn't lead to clarity or action, it's not reflection, it's rumination. Reflection looks like asking questions. What happened? Why did it matter? What can I do differently next time? It's about drawing lessons from experience and applying them forward. It has structure and purpose. It ends in either a decision, a realization, or a plan. It helps you grow. Rumination is different. It asks questions that have no answers. Why did I say that? What if I had done something else? Why can't I let this go? It turns a moment into a movie that plays again and again, leaving you in the same emotional state with no resolution. When you reflect, you create distance between yourself and your thoughts. You observe them, analyze them, and direct them. When you ruminate, you get caught inside your thoughts. They take control and you become a passenger. That's why rumination feels heavy. It drains your energy without giving anything back. You end up mentally and emotionally exhausted, but no wiser, no clearer, and no more prepared to act. People often fall into rumination after something doesn't go as planned. Maybe it was a conversation that didn't land well, a mistake that had consequences, or an opportunity that was missed. The mind, in an effort to make sense of things, starts digging into every detail. But instead of solving it loops, instead of healing, it reopens the wound. And the more you revisit it without resolution, the more distorted your perception becomes. A small mistake becomes a symbol of failure. A single bad day becomes a reflection of your identity. That's the trap of rumination. It takes what's small and makes it feel massive. The reason people get stuck in rumination is often emotional. There's usually guilt, shame, fear, or insecurity attached to the event. And when those emotions remain unprocessed, they fuel the loop. The mind keeps going back to the moment, trying to relieve the emotional tension, but without the tools to do so. Reflection, by contrast, acknowledges the emotion and seeks understanding. It doesn't avoid discomfort. It uses it. It says, yes, that was hard. What can I take from it? And then it moves on, training your mind to distinguish between the two means becoming more aware of the direction and effect of your thoughts. Ask yourself, is this thought helping me make a decision? Is it teaching me something? Am I closer to peace after thinking this through? If the answer is no, you're probably ruminating. And once you recognize that, you can interrupt the pattern. That doesn't mean forcing yourself to feel better instantly. It means choosing to redirect your mental energy into something productive, whether it's action, expression, or even just changing your focus. Writing is one of the most effective tools for breaking rumination. When you put your thoughts on paper, you slow them down, you separate them from your identity, you make them visible, and that visibility gives you power. What felt overwhelming in your head often looks much smaller when written down. Talking to someone can have the same effect. It's not just about getting advice, it's about being witnessed. Sometimes being heard is enough to loosen the grip of a repetitive thought. You also have to pay attention to the stories you tell yourself. Rumination is often fueled by internal narratives that are exaggerated or untrue. I always mess things up. Nobody takes me seriously. This one mistake ruined everything. These are not reflections, they're distortions. And if you don't challenge them, they become the lens through which you see the world. Reflection challenges those thoughts. It separates facts from feelings. It asks, what else could be true? The more you practice this awareness, the stronger your mind becomes. You start to notice when a thought is spiraling instead of serving. You begin to pause and question, rather than blindly follow where the mind wants to go. This shift builds mental resilience. It allows you to learn without self-punishment, to think deeply without drowning, and to move forward without dragging your past with you. Reflection opens walls, rumination builds walls, and your ability to tell the difference determines how you grow. Structure, connection, and consistent habits reduce both hopelessness and overthinking over time. The mind is not designed to thrive in chaos. When there is no structure, no rhythm, and no sense of stability in daily life, the brain begins to panic. Even in small ways, it seeks patterns. It craves a sense of control. When that structure is missing, we begin to overthink because we're grasping for certainty. We begin to feel hopeless because everything feels unpredictable and unmanageable. That's why routines and systems are not just tools for productivity. They're tools for emotional health. They provide anchors in the storm. They remind us that even when we can't control everything, we can still control something. Consistency doesn't mean living the same day over and over again. It means creating a foundation strong enough to support you when things get hard. A consistent habit, like waking up at the same time each day, writing in a journal, taking a walk, or planning your week may seem small on the surface, but it signals safety to your brain. It tells your nervous system, I've got this. There's order here. That sense of order helps reduce the mental chaos that leads to overthinking and the emotional exhaustion that feeds hopelessness. Connection plays a vital role too. Human beings are not built to navigate life alone. When we isolate ourselves, our thoughts become louder and less accurate. We lose perspective. We begin to believe that our fears, doubts, and mistakes are unique. But when we connect with others, when we talk, listen, and share, we realize that what we're experiencing is part of the human condition. We're reminded that other people have felt what we're feeling and made it through. That reminder is more than comforting. It's empowering. One of the most overlooked forms of support is simply being seen and heard. You don't always need advice. You don't need someone to fix you. You just need someone to say, I understand. That kind of connection disrupts the feedback loop of overthinking. When you express a thought out loud and someone responds with empathy or curiosity, your brain processes the thought differently. It becomes less threatening. It loses its grip, and slowly the spiral begins to loosen. Building habits of connection is just as important as building personal routines. It can be as simple as checking in with a friend regularly, attending a group you care about, or scheduling time for meaningful conversation. These habits create emotional infrastructure. They make support available before crisis strikes. They prevent rather than just react. Structure also brings momentum. Without a plan or routine, every task feels like a mountain. Decisions become harder, especially when your mind is already overwhelmed. But with structure, you reduce decision fatigue. You know what comes next? You don't have to wrestle with every small choice. That frees up mental space for reflection, creativity, and peace. And when your mind has space, it doesn't need to overthink. It starts to work with you instead of against you. Hopelessness often grows in the absence of visible progress. When days blur together and you don't have markers of improvement, it's easy to feel like nothing is changing. But consistent habits offer visible proof that change is happening. Every time you show up, take care of something, or stick to a commitment, you build a sense of trust in yourself. You begin to see that you're capable of showing up even when it's hard. That trust becomes a foundation for hope. Even the smallest habits can create a ripple effect. Drinking water in the morning can lead to clearer thinking. Taking 5 minutes to journal can help process emotions. Tidying your space can reduce visual noise and create mental clarity. These aren't magic solutions, but they shift your inner state just enough to give you more capacity for bigger challenges. And once you begin to feel that shift, even slightly, you gain momentum. The goal is not perfection. The goal is stability. Life will always be unpredictable, but when you have systems and relationships in place, you don't get swept away by every wave. You bend, but you don't break. You adapt, but you don't collapse. Structure keeps you grounded. Connection keeps you encouraged. Habits keep you growing. These three elements, structure, connection, and consistency, work together to create a life that can hold both the weight of hard days and the hope of better ones. When your external world supports your internal needs, everything becomes just a little more manageable. And when things are manageable, they no longer feel impossible. The mind can rest, the heart can hope, and life, one step at a time, begins to move forward again. The truth is, hopelessness and overthinking are not signs that you are broken. They are signs that something in your life needs attention, structure, and care. They are not permanent conditions. They are temporary signals, and like any signal, they can be understood, responded to, and moved through. The solution isn't found in waiting for the perfect moment or the perfect feeling. It's found in small, honest steps, steps that create clarity, momentum, and trust in yourself. When you shift your focus from perfection to progress, from rumination to reflection, and from isolation to connection, everything begins to change. You don't need all the answers today. You just need the courage to take the next right step. Because even the smallest act of movement holds more power than the loudest thought. You are never as stuck as you think you are, and you are always one decision away from a different direction.